Hi DevOps Loop, my name is Matthew Skelton and I'm very pleased to be here to share with you some ideas today about what is platform as a product. And this is using some clues from my book, Team Topologies. So as I said, I'm the co-author of this book, Team Topologies. I'm also the founder at Conflux. The book Team Topologies was published in September 2019 by IT Revolution Press. Obviously, it's one of the best publishers of IT books at the moment. Books like Accelerate, DevOps Handbook, and so on. Amazing collection, amazing family of books around IT and building software systems in general. The Team Topologies book has been described as innovative tools and concepts for structuring the next generation digital operating model. That was from Charles Betts at Forrester Research. So it's not an operating model in itself, but it includes aspects of what we might need to produce that operating model. Crucially today, this is a question that I'd like to try and answer. What is platform as a product, and why should I adopt this approach? And the talk's got 4 sections. They look like this. First off, we'll look at what is a platform. Now, that might sound really obvious, but I think it's really important to take the time just to sort of just define something around that. We'll then look at what really is a product, get some clues to help us think through that and the implication for platform as a product. We'll look at some examples. And then a few ideas about getting started with this approach. So first off then, what is a platform? In Team Topologies, we like this definition from Evan Bottcher from 2018. A digital platform is a foundation of self-service APIs, tools, services, knowledge, and support, which are arranged as a compelling internal product. Now, there's a huge amount of stuff there, so let's unpack that a bit. First aspect is the self-service APIs, tools, and services. Because if you think about it in the context of a fast flow of change, which is what Team Topologies is all about, if we've got a fast flow of change, we cannot be in a position where we're waiting for people to respond to manual tickets. Say, hey, put in a request, and then a few days later, someone gets around to it and configures something for us. We can't be doing that stuff. We have to be working towards a situation where this platform kind of gets out of the way of software delivery teams. And it gets out of the way by providing sensible APIs, tools and services around that. But in addition to that, there needs to be knowledge and support because things are always evolving. A particular implementation of a service might need some context to understand how best to use it, or perhaps when that was implemented, it works really well for the business context. But now, 6 months later, there's some new technologies in there, and we need to have a conversation and awareness about how this thing might need to be used or changed. And it's run as a compelling internal product. And that's really kind of an important aspect. But the key dynamic there is that it's compelling so that teams want to use this internal platform. They're not forced to use it. And that sets up a really interesting, really healthy dynamic inside an organization. Just a couple of years ago, back in May 2020, ThoughtWorks with their technology radar had already started thinking about this approach. So applying product management to internal platforms. In fact, they said actually adopt that. That was 2 years ago now, back in 2020. And they said start to try platform engineering product teams. So start to use kind of the principles from Team Topologies, i.e. streamlined teams, end-to-end flow inside an internal platform. They recommended that you could start to trial that. And here's a quotation from that back a couple of years ago. We've been using the concepts from Team Topologies to split platform teams in our projects into enabling teams, core platform within a platform teams, and stream-focused teams. So that's a couple of years ago now. And then just last year, so a year later, in ThoughtWorks Technology Radar, April 2021, they're now recommending adopt this approach of platform engineering product teams. So the approach that we kind of articulated in Team Topologies of using the same patterns across all parts of the engineering organization, streamlined teams as the starting point, is something that they're saying, look, this is now something you can adopt because we've tried it and it seems to work really, really well. And crucially, they're saying, hold off, sort of stop doing this approach to layered platform teams where we're splitting by technology. That's the kind of traditional way of arranging a platform. And they're saying, just hold on that. Don't invest more time in that kind of area, because this kind of Team Topology stream oriented or flow oriented approach seems to work much, much better. So here's a quotation then from the April 2021 ThoughtWorks Tech Radar. We're still big fans of using concepts from Team Topologies as we think about how best to organize platform teams. We consider platform engineering product teams to be a standard approach and a significant enabler for high-performing IT. One thing that we wish we'd done in the Team Topologies book itself is to describe a platform like this. A platform is a curated experience for engineers who are the customers of the platform. That you will not find that quotation in the book. Sadly, we wish we put it in. But anyway, this is how we now see it. It's not really about the technology fundamentally. The technology is a really important part, clearly. But start from this concept of making the platform like a kind of experience for the people who are going to use it. Start with their needs and their user experience and work back from there in terms of what kind of technology needs to be in place to make that experience a reality. And it's quite a different perspective from platforms of the past, but it seems to be massively valuable. So as we start to think about platform as a product and what that kind of means, the starting point then is that we're treating it like we would treat any other kind of digital product. So it needs to be reliable, it needs to be usable, it needs to be fit for purpose. But it's for voluntary internal customers. So internal engineering teams who choose to use our internal platform. This internal platform might be for infrastructure, it might be for CI/CD, it might be for data, it might be for design, it might be for machine learning, all sorts of things. But these internal teams are choosing to use our platform because it's really compelling. Some people have described it as a kind of a path of least resistance. So make the right thing the easiest thing to do. So it's quite opinionated. It needs context about what these teams are doing and what challenges they need to deal with, what problems they need to solve. It needs to have empathy to understand where they're coming from and what it feels like to work in that situation. In Team Topologies, we talk about 4 fundamental team types, and we think these are the only 4 that are really needed in a modern organization doing building and running software systems. And actually, the most important kind of team is the stream-aligned team. This is a team, a very small group, so up to about 9 people, with a mix of skills, and they stay together for a significant period of time. Perhaps the team members change very slowly, but the team itself is going to be around for many years as a concept. And this streamlined team has end-to-end responsibility for one or more services or applications or something like this. They do not need to hand off to any other team because in the context of fast flow, handing off is extremely expensive. It breaks or blocks fast flow effectively. So what we want is no handoffs at all, end-to-end inside this team. They have a mix of skills to help them deal with all the challenges they need to deal with for that set of applications, one or more applications. And they are empowered to do the right thing for that kind of application software. They're on call for that service or application. So when it goes down, they're the ones who are going to be there fixing it. And so we get a very, very tight feedback loop, very, very rapid feedback loop around that build, run, deploy. This is a model that Amazon have been using for nearly 2 decades now, nearly 20 years, called You Build It, You Run It. Some of the details are slightly different, but the principle is the same. It's been proven. It is something that helps to scale. Now, that streamlined team has got this focus on flow for a particular one or more applications or services. To help them retain their autonomy and independence, they might take on additional activities or additional technologies or additional things that are a little bit outside of the domain, a little bit outside of the field of that application or service. By taking on those additional responsibilities, it keeps their independence. It helps them to retain their independence and autonomy. And retaining that autonomy and independence is really useful because it avoids dependencies in time. So, for example, let's make it a bit more explicit. The streamlined team that's focused on some aspect of passport applications for a government service, so citizen service, might decide to retain its independence. They might decide, well, we're actually going to take some responsibility for defining the infrastructure or some aspect of the data. That's not really related to passport applications, but it helps us to retain our independence. That's fine. But then they might decide to take on something else, maybe related to continuous integration, and they might decide to take on something else to retain their independence. At some point, the cognitive load of that streamlined team is going to be too high. they're effectively pulling against independence and cognitive load. Those two things are kind of a little bit in tension. So at some point, that streamlined team is going to start to slow down because they do not have enough focus on their core mission, which is something to do with passport applications. And that's when these three other types of team come in. Enabling team, complicated subsystem team, and platform team. And these three team types, three supporting team types, are there to help with flow in the streamlined team by reducing cognitive load in the streamlined team. And that's the only reason why these three supporting team types exist. Or the primary reason is the way to think about it is that's basically the only reason for them to exist. And that means that the only reason really for a platform to exist in a team topologies context is to help with fast flow in streamlined teams that use that platform. And part of the way it does that is by reducing cognitive load on the streamlined teams that use the platform. So it's quite an unusual, quite a novel way of thinking about a platform, but it seems to be hugely valuable to many organizations in the context of a fast flow change. So as we can see here, we've got a streamlined team. There's no handoffs in between. They've got end-to-end responsibility. They deploy into live. We get feedback. Those green arrows there, feedback coming back from the live systems into the team that's building and running these systems, and that's all great. But at some point, they are going to exceed their team cognitive load. There are going to be some things which they think, this is not close enough to passport applications or whatever it is they're focused on. And at that point, that's where the platform team can really come in and provide some services which are, let's say, less differentiated, that help this streamlined team to retain its core focus on its main mission, which is, let's say, passport application. And some of those aspects that it was working on before are now handled by a platform, which helps the streamlined team to retain its independence and focus. There's also the idea of three team interaction modes. And these are the only three ways in which we think are needed for teams to think about how they interact with other teams. Collaboration, shown in this diagram in purple, kind of cross-hatching. We've got two teams working together for a defined period of time to achieve a specific purpose. Usually that purpose is to find a good boundary, of responsibility that works well for flow. Collaboration kind of is expensive, if you like it blurs the boundaries, takes time, but it's massively valuable, because if we find a good boundary that works really well for flow, then we've really helped not only the team that needs to consume the services, but we've helped to raise awareness in both teams about what it takes to find a good boundary for fast flow, which is a kind of a whole new set of concepts which weren't really sort of present in the discourse and discussions around kind of software architecture really much before the Team Topologies book came out. The second team interaction mode is called X as a service. That's shown in the middle. We've got one team providing something and one team consuming something as a service. Now, if you think about it, if we've got a good boundary in place, there should be very little kind of interaction between those two teams, because one team just consumes it. It's got an endpoint, if you like, or some sort of service definition. And if it all works well, they're just consuming that service, and it's fine. It's very low friction. And ideally, that X as a service is the kind of outcome of collaboration. That's what we're looking for. We're trying to find X as a service boundaries which work really well for flow. The final interaction mode is called facilitating. This is where one team helps another team to increase its capability or awareness, or helps it to adopt a new way of working or something like that. And collaboration and facilitating are temporary interaction modes. They might last for days or maybe weeks, whereas X as a service in the middle is almost like a permanent interaction mode. It's certainly long-lived. You might expect an X as a service interaction to take place over the course of many months or even years if we found a really good boundary for flow. So bear those in mind as we're thinking about the kind of interactions, the dynamics between teams. It's not just a kind of structure of teams, it's how they interact that makes it much more valuable. So another concept that I've already mentioned, I'll go into a little bit more now, is team cognitive load. So cognitive load was first kind of defined by the Australian psychologist John Sweller back in 1988, and he defined it as cognitive load is a total amount of mental effort being used in the working memory. When we're building software systems, there's a huge amount of mental effort being used, but we've got a lot in our working memory when we're thinking about building, defining software, testing software, deploying, or even diagnosing live incidents in production. There's a lot of working memory being used. And so, although it's not exactly the same as cognitive load used in a learning context, it's very, very similar. Typically speaking, this is a bit of a simplification, but this is what we mean by different kinds of cognitive load. We've got intrinsic cognitive load, which is kind of like the skills that we might learn. Extraneous cognitive load is kind of the mechanism, and usually is associated with things that are effectively like a distraction from what we're trying to focus on. And germane cognitive load is, in this context of building and running software systems, is the kind of domain focus, the thing that our team is supposed to be focused on. For example, if I was in a team building, let's say, a banking application in Java, if someone asks the question, how are classes defined in Java? Well, that's kind of intrinsic. It's just something I should have kind of learned. It should be, I shouldn't need to think about it too much. I've gone through some training, or my colleagues have gone through some training to not have to think about that too much. It doesn't take too much cognitive load. It's there, but it doesn't take too much. It's not something I think about very often. However, if we're always saying, oh, how do I deploy this application again? Which config files do I have to change to make this work? Which command line tool do I need to run? That feels like extraneous. It's nothing to do with building a banking application. It's getting in the way. And of course, the question, how do bank transfers work, is a key aspect of building a bank application in Java. So that's Germane. That is the domain that we need to work in. And what we're really trying to do is we have to deal with a certain amount of intrinsic cognitive load. We're trying to minimize and squeeze the extraneous cognitive load because that's not valuable really to our work. We're trying to leave more space for the germane cognitive load, which relates to the domain that we're supposed to be working in. If you're interested in how cognitive load applies to building software systems in more detail, then have a look at a series called Hacking Your Head. You'll find that by someone called Joe Pierce, a series of talks from a few years ago. Here's the key aspect from all this, though. The platform should not increase the cognitive load on teams using the platform. That is a key design criterion, a key success criterion of a modern platform. It should not increase the cognitive load on teams using the platform. So we need to be actively assessing the cognitive load of using this internal platform on the teams that are using it. That becomes like a key driver for kind of measuring our success and for kind of talking about it with our customers, internal customers. One way we can kind of help to keep ourselves on track is by using what we call in the Team Topologies book the thinnest viable platform. Here's a visualization. This is a kind of chocolate that we have in the UK. It's almost like the thinnest viable chocolate that you could imagine. It's the smallest set of APIs, documentation, and tools needed to accelerate teams developing modern software services and systems. And it's thinnest viable platform because we want to make it the smallest amount of stuff that is needed to accelerate delivery. So it's a small, curated set of complementary services or patterns to use together to simplify and accelerate delivery. It could be just a wiki page. A platform can literally be a wiki page that says, we think you should use these services from this cloud platform. If you use them together like this, they'll work really well for your context. Or if your context is this second class of context, use these services. We don't need to build anything necessarily. It's about curating that experience for people who are using it. So a good platform is just big enough but no bigger. Like if we can provide that acceleration and reduction of cognitive load by pre-selecting a set of existing services for teams using it, why should we need to build anything more? So it's a very nimble way of thinking about platforms. We're always trying to drive towards the smaller set of stuff that we're providing, starting fundamentally with reducing cognitive load and therefore increasing flow in teams that use the platform. This allows us then to think about the evolution of the platform. When we combine it with the team interaction modes that we've just seen, we're expecting to have strong collaboration with streamlined teams for any new service or evolution of an existing service. The pattern might look something like this. We start off collaborating. So in yellow is the streamlined team and in blue is the platform team. We start off collaborating. But where we're trying to get to is this X as a service interaction, where we've got a really good service boundary that works really well for flow. And this is a journey. We're starting off with the expectation of finding a good boundary, Often it might work, but sometimes it might not. So we need to listen for the signals that tell us whether it's working or not. We should be expecting to provide support and really good documentation for services that are stable. There's this dynamic of discover what's needed, continue to collaborate a bit, and then establish that good flow-aligned boundary. And when we've established that, then we can say, well, look, this is kind of released, and we're providing support for it. So there's a dynamic as we're doing this kind of co-discovery of where these boundaries should lie. So here's the kind of mission, if you like, of an internal platform is we need to clarify platform service boundaries and provide abstractions to reduce the cognitive load on teams. And again, that's it's a different mental model for what we're doing inside a platform compared to many of the platform models from before. It's very much focused on fast flow, but many organizations around the world these days do have a need to focus on fast flow. So it's probably relevant in your context as well. A little bit later, we'll share some details of an organization called Uswitch RV who demonstrated this approach a few years ago and had some great success with it. But we'll come back to that a little bit later. Before that, let's look at what really is a product. Bear with me, because it sounds really obvious, but it's worthwhile reminding ourselves how this works. Wikipedia to start with, why not? Product is anything that can be offered to a market to satisfy the desire or need of a customer. Okay, fine. There's some interesting stuff here. We've got the word customer, and we've got the word need. So we've already got a focus on customer needs. Does your internal platform currently focus strongly on customer needs? Does it identify the customers and their needs and work towards them? Marty Kagan, who is one of the foremost kind of product people in probably in the world, really, but certainly out of Silicon Valley, defines a product as a holistic user experience covering lots of different dimensions. Let's put this into practice. Here is a photograph I took in the center of Leeds, the city where I live. It's a sports shoe. It's a photograph of a sports shoe shop selling sports shoes from a variety of different vendors. But here's the thing. I can choose to go and buy one of those sports shoes, but no one's going to force me to buy it. It's a product. That's a key aspect of a product. A product is optional to use. No one is forced to use that product. The second thing about product, it's carefully designed and curated. We're using the right tools. We've got the right mindset. We really have strong empathy with the customer. So it's carefully designed and curated. It's not just thrown together. It's not just an assemblage of different bits and pieces. The next thing about a product is that it simplifies something for users. Here's a photograph I took in the museum on San Francisco Pier. This is an early version of Spotify. Basically, you put a coin in the slot, and you choose the record. It means you don't have to carry around a big stack of plastic, shellac records and a record player, which is pretty heavy at the time. It means you can just walk into the bar and select the song. Jukebox. But this is simplifying something for users. They're happy to use it, simplifying their life. They don't need to carry around all this kind of traditional kind of music equipment. A product also evolves to take advantage of technology changes. If it doesn't, it'll just become obsolete. So let's bring this together with this phrase we had before. A platform is a curated experience for engineers who are the customers of the platform. Let's apply these product ideas to this internal platform and see what comes out. A platform is optional to use. No team is forced to use a platform. So that's quite a different place from lots of organizations today. This means that platforms must advocate for their platform product and kind of market it to internal users. So now inside our internal platform, we need to have people who understand how to describe products well, do marketing effectively, reach people and persuade them to come and try our product. That feels strange in many traditional internal platform situations from the past, where lots of teams were just forced to use it. But it sets up a really important dynamic because it means that the platform has to go and find out what the true user needs are, what the true internal customer needs are, and build only that. It means we can avoid building a whole load of stuff which we don't need. A platform is carefully designed and curated. So platforms must be designed with the user in mind. This is internal teams. We've got this strong focus on user experience or developer experience to help make these internal platforms incredibly effective. The platform is also going to simplify something for users. Platforms must help users to achieve their goals by understanding their user needs and simplifying tasks. we have to have these conversations with users and actually map out and have this deep empathy with what they're trying to do with their situation, and put things in place which actually make their lives easier, not harder. And the platform itself must evolve to take advantage of technology changes, because the speed of technology change now is so great, is so rapid, that if we plan to put something in place with a horizon of, say, 5 years, it'll be completely obsolete within maybe 2, because of the speed of technology change. We have to expect to regularly and rapidly replace or swap out things that we've built only a year, 18 months ago. And again, that's a very different dynamic. So we need this clear roadmap or trajectory of how the platform's evolving, and that roadmap itself is continuously evolving. This all means that a platform, an internal platform, needs to use modern product management and service management techniques. That is also quite unfamiliar to many people from a kind of infrastructure type or data platform background. But the nice thing is, of course, that we have hundreds or thousands of cloud products available to kind of inform how we might do this. We take these principles that are used and shared by many of these kind of cloud-based providers and bring them inside the organization. So not only we can bring the practices from these, but sometimes we can even hire people who have worked at one of these organizations and bring them inside to help run our internal platform, because it's the same principles, almost all the same principles at play. If we're working with kind of large volume B2C or an internal platform, some things are slightly different, but a lot of the stuff is very, very similar. So we can use modern SaaS or cloud companies to inform how we run our internal platform. So what else might we need? Well, first thing is product metrics. And if you think about it, we can use these 4 key metrics from Accelerate: lead time, deployment frequency, mean time to restore, and change fail percentage. We can use those to inform the kind of quality of our platform. Because if we think about these 4 key metrics and how they apply to the streamlined teams, if our platform is helping to make those 4 key metrics helping to improve those 4 key metrics in the streamlined teams that use our platform must be doing well. So our platform is measured on how well it improves the metrics in teams that use the platform. We can also use some user satisfaction metrics. So you can run like a net promoter score or just a simple survey to see how happy your users are, because now they're effectively your customers or users. Well, let's find out whether they like our platform or not. So you can just do something simple like Twilio did, like this, simple agree or disagree, based on statements like, I can effectively build my software, or I understand the cost of running my service, something like this. You could do something more involved, but that's a good starting point. If you get a lot of negative reaction, that's a signal for conversation with many, many customers. If you get some really good feedback, then obviously you're doing something right, but there's always room for improvement. We also need to track adoption and engagement metrics. So which of the internal teams are adopting our platform, and how much are they engaging with the services that we're providing? If there's an unclear or patchy result, what is that? What's preventing that adoption? What's preventing that higher engagement? Need to get to the bottom of it, just as we would if this were a real external product. So we're tracking kind of the teams on the left of the picture, the teams that are currently already onboarded versus the teams that are on the right of the picture that are yet to be onboarded. And we're thinking about, we're trying to understand their needs and what might be stopping them from onboarding. When might be the right time for them to onboard? Is there some kind of tooling or documentation that they feel like they're missing before they would onboard, and so on and so on. And of course, we need some kind of what's really fairly low-level reliability metrics. Need this kind of comprehensive approach to metrics. Now, traditionally, many infrastructure or data platforms effectively just had reliability metrics, didn't go much beyond that. But this is a product now. We're running this as a proper product. We've got this customer-centric focus. We need the other metrics in there: product metrics, user satisfaction metrics, adoption engagement metrics, as well as the reliability metrics to make this work well. And effectively, the success of the platform is the success of the streamlined teams that use that platform. That's, again, a very different way of thinking about platform success, but seems to drive a really good set of outcomes for many organizations that use this approach. Let's have a look at a few examples. First example is from a company called Uswitch, since acquired by RB. And the full case study is online at teamtopologies.com. You'll find it there. Uswitch is a company based in the UK that helps consumers to compare different kind of services from different providers, things like broadband, mobile phone, electricity and gas providers, and so on and so on. Helps to compare these different offerings and to switch from one to another. And their story is really interesting because it shows many of the dynamics that we talked about already in this talk and that are in the Team Topologies book. In these diagrams, by the way, there's always a flow of change going from left to right. So that's why the diagrams look like they do. We're emphasizing that kind of flow of change from sort of ideas or version control all the way into production on the right-hand side of the diagram. When Uswitch started their journey towards kind of a fast flow approach, in the case study, they talk about three different areas. Mobile, so mobile phones, energy, and broadband. Now, as it happens in the UK, these three all have different kind of compliance regimes, so different auditors effectively. And so these three domains were very separate. They had separate teams associated with each one, and each team could choose to build whatever kind of infrastructure needed within reason to enable that kind of domain and set of applications to work well. However, over time, the number of calls into Amazon Web Services, AWS, the number of calls into AWS, it was increasing and increasing because these teams were taking on more and more and more of the kind of infrastructure support underneath their domain area. So, for example, the team focused on mobile phones was building more and more AWS infrastructure code to help support that mobile phone domain. So this is the problem, really, because these teams increasingly were focusing less and less on their domain and more on things that were not related to that domain. Paul Ingalls, who's now the CTO, said, we didn't change our organization because we wanted to use Kubernetes. We used Kubernetes because we wanted to change our organization. So Kubernetes being the container runtime. They introduced a technology that would force a change in the responsibility of teams. So it would force this change in the organization. It would force this ability to say, well, actually, we don't care about the stuff underneath, or we don't need to worry about it so much because someone else is taking care of it. And when they tracked the number of calls directly to AWS from these three different areas, they could start to see the number of those calls dropping off as these teams adopted the platform. This shows the number of calls into AWS directly from, say, mobile phones, or directly from broadband, or directly from energy. What this means effectively is that the cognitive load on those teams is also dropping off because they're no longer having to focus on the low-level details. So what this is showing here is another aspect of kind of platform purpose. It's helping streamline teams to deliver work autonomously with self-service capabilities, and it's reducing extraneous cognitive load. And this was an explicit awareness that Uswitch had when they were putting this stuff in place. So Paul Ingalls, again, CTO, we wanted to scale our teams but maintain principles of what helped us to move fast: autonomy, work with minimal coordination, and having self-service infrastructure. And so they decided to treat the platform as a product. Back in 2018, then, they decided to start this new platform just with a few services, just a few things in place. And they put things like centralized logging and metrics and a few things like this. But they focused on understanding the internal customer needs, focused on that conversation, really understanding what the user experience should be when using this internal platform. They didn't just go and build a whole load of services and say, right, you must use this now. They treated it as a proper product. So they did not force any of the teams to use this at all. Then they started to scale it up a little bit, and they started to see more and more teams adopting this, their internal platform. But there's one team in particular that did not adopt the platform immediately. And that was what they called the highest money-making team. That team was independent for much longer and was running its own infrastructure for much longer. Only when some of its really critical aspects were present, things relating to GDPR, security, alerting, and so on, did that team decide itself to adopt this platform. what they ended up with is, in the space of about 2.5 years, they managed to persuade all the internal teams to adopt this internal platform, but without forcing any of those teams to do so. And I think it's a great example of how this attention to customer needs can really win, because it sets up a very, very valuable dynamic. We can see here how they've mapped out, using this kind of Team Topologies, team types and interaction modes, how their software was built and run and delivered and so on back in the middle of 2021. There's another case study from Adidas, the sports company. In particular, there's a talk from DevOps Enterprise Summit a few years ago where they talk about their internal platform and what they focused on to make it work. You can see here on the right-hand side there, they're thinking about using Team Topologies interaction mode for collaboration and X as a service. They're thinking about where those are typically used. And what's particularly interesting is the amount of time that they say they're spending on building the product itself versus interacting and working with their customers. You see over here at the left-hand side, platform advisory and community is about half of the time that they spend. About half of the time is spent working with customers, understanding their needs, outreach, developer experience, that kind of thing. And about half of their time is spent on evolving the platform itself. And I think that split, roughly 50-50, of kind of building things versus understanding and exploring customer needs, is probably a good place to think about. And finally, a quick example from Spotify. Again, there's a case study online which you look in more detail at, but Spotify, they've got an internal platform and they basically provide 3 options. Some templates, which are kind of ready to go, don't give much customization, but allow you to get started quite quickly. The middle option is some customization available for teams that need a bit more control. And then on the right-hand side, they've got a kind of a full-blown API, which needs a bit more work to get it working, but it's super flexible. And this kind of approach of kind of differentiated offerings to meet different kind of customer needs and different kind of stages of maturity seems like a really good approach. So let's try and answer this question then. What is platform as a product and why should I adopt this approach? In this approach, a platform is optional to use. No team is forced to use a platform. That sets up a really good dynamic where we have to think about user needs and persuade people to use what we've built. The platform is carefully designed and curated. We're not just lumping together all kind of functionality. We're thinking about it much more holistically. This platform is also simplifying something for users. Crucially, it's actually reducing team cognitive load. We're explicitly making sure that what we provide as a platform is reducing cognitive load on the teams that use the platform. And our platform is definitely going to evolve to take advantage of technology changes. We are going to expect, if we build something using a particular technology this year, maybe next year, it'll be replaced. So we cannot get too precious about this stuff. We have to be expecting one of the cloud providers or whoever to provide this a new service or a new API or a new something that means actually we can swap this thing out. We built that ourselves, but we can swap it out and plug in something from another provider. The platform also uses modern product management and service management techniques. Again, it's not just assembly of technologies, it's an experience, and we're going to manage it as such. Why should we use it? Well, ultimately, we've got happier users, internal engineers, our colleagues in the same organization. It tends to avoid a kind of bloated technology approach because we're focused on making just providing the smallest, the thinnest viable platform. And crucially, we're expecting to design to evolve this platform. The way in which we design it enables us to evolve this platform and swap out parts that are obsolete or that are going to be obsolete, and helps us to keep pace. So we've not just built something assuming that that's going to be permanently used. We're building it to be replaceable or to be adaptable. Okay, let's have a look at how we might get started. The first thing to think about is assessing cognitive load. So how well can a streamlined team understand the platform? If they're going to use this platform on a regular basis, how well can they understand that? To find some way to assess the kind of cognitive load on teams currently using whatever platform you've got in place. We've got an example team cognitive load assessment on our GitHub repository, which is shown in the slides. If you search for team cognitive load assessment and Team Topologies, you'll find it online. It's quite a simple approach, but it works well enough. But you might be able to come up with something a bit more extensive. The key thing here is it's focused on people's awareness and ease of use of the tools and APIs and technologies and so on that you're providing to them. Obviously, if the results come back saying, well, actually, this area of the platform feels like it generates very high cognitive load, it's very difficult to use, makes no sense, then that's an area to focus on, because our aim is to reduce cognitive load and therefore increase flow of change. The second thing you can do is to actually define the platform. I mean, one thing that we found working with lots of organizations is that historically, many platforms were basically ill-defined or not defined at all. List the services that your platform provides. What kind of service level expectations have people got around these? What kind of support do you provide? What's the experience of using this particular API or this particular command line tool that you currently insist that teams must use? If it's really difficult to use that command line tool, can you improve the experience of that so it's easy for people to use it? How would you get that feedback loop going so that people can maybe suggest some improvements to some of the tools that you've got in place? Are you actually meeting real user needs with what your platform currently provides? Do you even know what kind of users you have or what kind of needs those users have? So start to define some of these things, and those conversations will help you to see where you need to put further effort in the future. And you can also think about team interactions, kind of who's responsible for what and who's impacted. In what ways do you actually collaborate on new platform services before you roll them out? If we're going to try and find a good boundary for flow, we need to find one or more teams to work with to try and assess what that boundary should be. You can't just put a service live without any kind of collaboration at all. It's almost certain that you'll get a bad boundary for flow. So think about this kind of dynamic of collaborating in order to find this good flow boundary and see what difference that might make. Linked in the slides here, we've got loads and loads of further examples from Zalando, Mercedes, Twilio, Adidas, ITV, Man Trucks, and Farfetch. These are all linked in the slides. So there's plenty of organizations around the world starting to adopt these kind of approaches. In fact, some of these organizations were doing this before the Team Topologies book came out. We were inspired by their early work. And we're increasingly seeing this kind of adoption. So what's next? Well, in our Team Topologies Academy online, we've got a course called Platform as a Product, online learning. So you can sign up for that. There are group discounts and so on if your team or whole organization or department wants to attend. We also recently were very pleased to be able to work with IT Revolution again, who published our second book. So this is Remote Team Interactions Workbook. We're taking the ideas from Team Topologies and applying these in a remote work context, some of which relates directly to people working on a platform, because that dynamic often is kind of tricky to navigate. And some of the patterns that we put in there are directly related to this relationship between platform and streamlined teams using it. We've got a bunch of infographics online on our website, teamtopologies.com/infographics. Lots of resources, links, slides, videos, templates, assessments, and so on and so on. As I mentioned before, we have our Team Topologies Academy, that's online video learning, at academy.teamtopologies.com. And that is it. So thank you. It's been great to be here and share with you some ideas about platforms as a product. More details, as I mentioned, at teamtopologies.com. Thank you very much and goodbye.